Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me today. Make sure that you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with your family and friends. I have a fantastic episode lined up for you today. But before I get to the main topic of today's episode, I briefly want to touch on a few things. The first thing is the mayoral race here in New York City, because we saw something stunning, and it really shouldn't be surprising at this point. The radicals in New York City have now nominated to represent the Democrat Party, Zohran Mamdani, as the Democrat nominee for mayor. Now, this is a committed socialist. He's a member of the Democrat Socialists of America. I've done episodes on them before, so make sure you check out those episodes. But he is a radical. He is like a Khan over in London, and are we going to be London 2.0 in New York City? I mean, the reality is that you can't get further to the left of this guy. He wants to shut down and defund the police department. He wants to close down correctional facilities and release all the prisoners into the population once again. He is someone that is calling for government-run grocery stores, which I'm not sure anyone told him, but it didn't work out too well for the Soviets. The one thing that it's really good at is breadlines. The idea that governments can run businesses efficiently is ludicrous. I mean, have any of you out there ever dealt with a government agency, whether it's local, state, or federal agency, and left that experience saying, wow, that was so pleasant. I wish I could do more business with them. I wish I could go back to DMV time and time again. Is anyone ever satisfied when they have to deal with government? So he's a crazy radical. What does it mean? Does it mean he's going to be the next mayor of New York City? And the answer is no, it does not. Okay, a lot of people are fed up in New York City. And let's be honest here, in the Democrat primary, only about 200,000 people went out and actually voted. So when we look at that figure, that's a small number of registered voters, those 18 and above that are registered to vote, that didn't vote in that election. So what does this say? Well, it says that Republicans better get their act together, that people that don't want a city run by Mamdani need to come together and actually get out and vote. Now, there are some that are arguing, Curtis Sliwa needs to get out of a race and everyone should get behind the current mayor, Mayor Eric Adams. But this is where the Republicans fail every time. Okay, listen. Everyone should be backing Curtis Sliwa at this point. And I'll bring Curtis on the program within a few weeks, because the reality is a Republican does have a chance to win this seat. And while Curtis Sliwa certainly isn't your arch conservative, he is someone that is far better than both Mamdani and Mayor Eric Adams. He is someone that has dedicated his life to New York City. It creates an opening for him. However, people have to get out and vote. When it comes to local elections, only between 10 to 25% of people, of those eligible to vote, actually turn out to vote. And I think this is an opportunity. If Republicans can advance those margins by 8%, well, they could win this election. Let's hope that happens. And I'll have more on that in future episodes, so make sure you pay attention. Another topic is how we look at the media. And all the media does is try and bash this administration. The media has contempt for President Trump. That's not surprising to any of the listeners out there. They don't like the guy. They want to see him fail, and they don't care if America fails in the process. And a great example of this is when we examine the Iranian strikes and what the Trump administration did. Now, as far as military maneuvers go, this was a great strategic operation. The radio silence, the fact that it didn't leak out, the way the military executed the mission was flawless. And then the media comes out and immediately they start bashing the administration. Well, they didn't really set back Iran's nuclear program, and the administration's lying, and they only may have set it back in a matter of months as opposed to years. It was completely ludicrous. They did this based on an anonymous source over at the Defense Intelligence Agency that leaked out an initial assessment, which initial assessments are notoriously wrong. And the media doesn't want to give credit where credit is due. Listen, you might not like President Trump. You may disagree with him, but you cannot argue the fact that this was a bold mission that he gave the orders for, that the mission was executed flawlessly. Just using simple reason and logic, it set Iran's nuclear program back not months, not years, but perhaps decades. Let's be honest about this. The amount of munitions that we use, the types of munitions that we use, the way the munitions were used, going into ventilation systems, it destroyed the nuclear facility. There's little doubt about that. It almost entombed the entire nuclear plant. And when we look at the equipment that was damaged in this blast, this isn't equipment you could go on Amazon and just get it delivered to your house the next day. This is equipment that takes years to get and put together and build. So when they come out there and they're trying to downplay the damage that was done to Iranians' nuclear facilities, it's clear they're doing it because they simply don't like Trump and they want him to fail. And if Trump fails, America fails. This has been the problem with the media for quite some time. And when we look at the episode that I'm putting together today, we're at the 4th anniversary of the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism. I constantly hear in the media how Trump's a dictator, how Trump's an authoritarian, how he's destroying democracy, and all that is lies. And I'll talk about that in the next segment. But the reality is that the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism is the biggest threat. The United States isn't going to become authoritarian through one person. The United States will become an authoritarian country through the bureaucracy. Russia and China don't represent the greatest threat to America and our liberties. It's the bureaucracy that represents the greatest threat to our liberties. And while they want to try and stamp the dictator label on Trump at any chance they could get, the truth is that we have lost more of our liberty through the hands of the bureaucracy than any single president of the United States. The bureaucracy has far more power and control today, and the national strategy it was just the latest in a series of policies and expansions within government that has empowered the bureaucracy and where the bureaucracy is now out of control. We now have a bureaucracy that has emerged as the 4th branch of government that's unencumbered by checks and balances, unencumbered by constitutional restraints. This national strategy is the biggest threat to our freedom. And for all you Democrats out there, understand, any administration could use the national strategy as they see fit. And that's why I talk about the national strategy so much. You have so many Republicans and conservatives and liberals, and I'm talking about actual old school liberals, not the progressives that want to claim they're liberals today, but they're all silent when it comes to this document. I've been on this document for day one because of the vagueness, the idea that they want to criminalize normal constitutional rights, normal constitutional freedoms that we enjoy, our God-given liberties. They want to criminalize wrongthing, all because it goes against their narratives. And a lot of conservatives and Republicans have been silent on this document for years. I mean, this document has been in place for 4 years now. And understand that this document was never about protecting Americans. It was always about targeting them. From the day it was released, the strategy became a political weapon to use against political opponents and anyone who dared to challenge government overreach. As we hit the 4-year anniversary mark, this deeply troubling document still exists, and President Trump and his administration have not spoken about it, and he hasn't rescinded this unconstitutional abomination. The idea that the bureaucracy should have the power to label law-abiding citizens as potential terrorists under vague terms, anti-government sentiment, anti-authority sentiment. It's revealing. And I've explained this time and time again. If you look, what does anti-government sentiment actually mean? What does anti-authority sentiment actually mean? Why are these terms not defined in the national strategy? And it's intentional. This document went through dozens of hands before it received approval. It went through all the agencies, the lawyers within these agencies, really smart people. So it was intentional that they left it out because it could be anything the bureaucrats want it to mean. This was an unprecedented strategy that marked a shift in how the federal government views we the people, how they view us as the threat to the system. Notice how this document doesn't say anything about anti-American sentiment. It doesn't talk about, those expressing anti-Americanism may be potential indicators of terrorism, domestic terrorists. Just last week in New York City, we saw this huge protest of people supporting Iran over the United States. This is the same crew that supports Hamas. This is the same crew that constantly pushes anti-American sentiment out there. And I'm not saying that they should be declared domestic terrorism. They have the right, they have the freedom to have any opinion they want to have. I may disagree with them. I believe they're wrong. But in a truly free society, you have the right to have your own opinion. So where am I going with this? Well, I think the lack of anti-American sentiment in the document's kind of revealing, because this glaring omission says it all. The true purpose was to criminalize dissent against the government. Anyone that threatens the power of the government. It wasn't about protecting the nation. And I do believe that the reason that maybe it's not being rescinded is because Republicans see it as, well, now we get to use this document. Now we get to change the examples in this document, and I encourage every single one of you out there to read the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism. It's only 31 pages long. It's not a long read. But when you read it, you'll understand why I have stayed on top of this from the beginning, why I've tried to highlight it. And now that we have the OD&I director, Tulsi Gabbard, declassifying information, we see how it was used against the American people. And I'm going to get to that in a minute. But before I get to that, let's look at this idea of authoritarianism, because I keep on hearing that President Trump is a dictator, that he's taken us down the path of authoritarianism. And I hate to break it to them, but it's not Trump that's going to turn America into an authoritarian country. It's going to be the bureaucracy. Not for nothing, just use your logic for a second. 2 weeks ago, you had the No Kings protests. Millions of Americans going out on the street across the country protesting that President Trump is acting like a king. Would a real authoritarian allow those protests to take place? Would a real authoritarian allow these people to speak out? The dear leader. And think about that logically. So you're coming out there, you're saying the worst of the worst about President Trump. You're declaring that he's a dictator here in the United States, that the United States is an authoritarian government. And yet, how many people who didn't commit a crime were arrested in the No Kings protest? How many of those protests were actually shut down? Zero. If I look at every other authoritarian government on the planet, you don't see these types of protests. You see them squashed pretty damn quickly. You see the organizers of the protest being thrown in prison. And people need to cool it with the rhetoric of Trump being a dictator. He's not a dictator. Are the courts not handcuffing him with numerous injunctions, nationwide injunctions that are stopping his policies from being implemented? Where's the evidence that Trump is violating those court orders? The state's not pushing back against Trump? Has any state come out and announced, well, we're no longer a sanctuary state because of the dear leader, because of the dictator? Or is California, New York, and other far left states still fighting this administration tooth and nail? When we look at it from an objective perspective, Trump is not a dictator. He's not even close to a dictator. And do you really believe that the bureaucracy itself would allow Trump to become a dictator? Why is Trump a dictator? Because he's enforcing immigration law? Because he's detaining criminal illegal immigrants and deporting them from the country? Because he's going after those with final removal orders? Because he's going into communities, and of course, some people that are illegal immigrants are going to be swept up in these raids. They're illegally here. That's not dictatorship. It's enforcing the law. And people will say, well, he should be working with these state governments. No, these state governments have actually passed laws. They have executive orders that have been signed where they're not allowed to coordinate with ICE officials. Had these states, California, New York, and other states, Massachusetts, another big one, had these states said, yes, we are going to allow the criminal justice system, we're going to allow our correctional facilities, the police precincts work with ICE. We're going to allow the courts in Massachusetts to work with ICE. ICE wouldn't have to go into the communities. Things would be a lot more streamlined. But instead, these governors, they want to lead the resistance. They want to raise their profile to further their political ambitions. And so it's not a dictatorship. The bureaucracy is where the dictatorship lies. That's where you want to talk about authoritarianism. Well, recently declassified documents from the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, show that the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security had the authority because of the national strategy where they could open probes on Americans for nothing more than, quote, concerning non-criminal behavior. We don't know what the definition is of concerning non-criminal behavior, but what I do know is that investigation shouldn't be opened for non-criminal behavior. And it reminds me of Carol Crawford from the CDC when she sent an email to then Twitter stating that any unapproved opinion should be scrubbed from Twitter's website. And she used the words unapproved opinions, as if the government gets to dictate what are the right opinions and what are the wrong opinions. What opinions can Americans hold? When we look at the national strategy, we now see the abuses of power and we see how widespread they were. That's the threat. That's why America is becoming more authoritarianism. We're talking about that. It's the real threat to the republic, that the national strategy is what pushes authoritarianism, not President Trump. When we're looking at this national strategy, the abuses of power were widespread. And it's funny because all those who want to declare that Trump is a dictator. Remember, many of these same fools, they didn't care when the country was locked down. They didn't care when blue state governors shut down their states for months at a time. When kids were prevented from going to school for nearly 2 years in some cases. You had vax mandates, mask mandates. Little children being forced to wear masks for 6 to 8 hours a day. They didn't care that anyone that disagreed with getting the shot, that their livelihood was potentially destroyed because they didn't comply with the little Mussolini wannabes out there. And that's the thing. You know, people will be like, oh, well, it was a crisis. It was a pandemic. What did you expect the government to do? Excuse me, what's the very definition of authoritarianism? Well, it's one in a handful of people making the decisions. Isn't that exactly what happened during the coronavirus? Was there a single state legislative body out there that passed the law locking things down? Was there a single state legislative body that passed the law requiring schools to shut down for nearly 2 years? Single piece of legislation that passed, all representatives that passed, stating that we had to put on these masks. So the same people that want to scream about authoritarianism, they were the petty tyrants throughout the entirety of coronavirus. But it's not just with the coronavirus. That's examples they used in the national strategy, that if you speak out against the pandemic policies, if you speak out against mandates, well, you're expressing anti-authority sentiment and you could be investigated as a potential domestic terrorist. But it wasn't just about the coronavirus. Anyone who complained at a school board meeting ran the risk that they were going to be investigated as a domestic terrorist. You had the National School Boards Association reach out to the Merrick Garland's Justice Department requesting that parents get investigated under the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act. An act that was designed following the 9/11 attacks. Never should have been passed. Completely disagree with it. But it was designed to target international terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda. And here you have the National School Boards Association pushing Merrick Garland to investigate parents who are concerned about what their children are learning, who are concerned about their children being masked up. And Merrick Garland, he obliged. We saw the FBI issue threat tags, school board threat tags, and it really tells you a lot. Individuals who criticized any type of mandates ran the risk of being declared a domestic terrorist. MAGA supporters, there were MAGA threat tags. The government looking at transactions of people that support Trump, asking banks to turn over information. Catholics who dared to hold pro-life and traditional gender beliefs. Catholics as domestic violent extremists. Think about how the FBI created threat tag systems to track Americans and open investigation files on these individuals who were engaged in constitutionally protected activity. Not only were these actions unconstitutional, they extended well beyond the statutory authority granted to these agencies by Congress. Okay, and the national strategy, the mechanism laid out in the strategic implementation plan, they operated in a legal gray area where bureaucrats acted independently and used vague, undefined criteria to investigate and target ordinary Americans. What can be more authoritarian than that? Understand that this lack of oversight allowed millions of taxpayer dollars to be funneled to silence their own voices. You have censorship initiatives like the Stanford's Election Integrity Partnership, collaborating with the government agencies. It was a DHS-run program. And what did they do? They suppressed online speech. And they did it under the pretext of combating misinformation. Meanwhile, at the same time they're combating misinformation, they're engaging in the largest conspiracy to cover up the cognitive decline of President Joe Biden. Let me ask every single one of you out there, should your tax dollars be used to silence your voice? The hallmark of a free society is freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, freedom of religion, freedom to petition government, freedom to purchase a firearm. All these things are important in a free society. And yet, under the national strategy, all that was violated. How many of you are aware that the ATF began building a database of gun owners throughout the United States, despite a congressional law explicitly forbidding that to happen? We should not have to use our tax dollars, our hard-earned money, so that the bureaucracy could violate our God-given liberties. It's insane. Even more insane is we're seeing the anti-ICE riots break out. This started in downtown Los Angeles, spread to Washington, a few other states. We're now seeing the No Kings 2.0 rally that's supposed to take place on July 4th. As long as it's peaceful, they have a right to do that. But when we look at the riots, vehicles burned, property vandalized, police attacked with rocks, law enforcement officers, ICE agents being surrounded. You have enormous damage being done, foreign flags being waved in the streets. I want you to think about that for a second, because the same bureaucrats, the same progressive activists who are screaming about authoritarianism, the same ones who scream about government power, these are the same people that once claimed concerned parents were domestic extremists. And now they're silent. They're silent when property is damaged. They're silent when people are assaulted. So we have President Trump back in office, and their hypocrisy is on full display. You have the narrative of domestic extremism conveniently disappear as violence erupts from the political left in a lot of these major cities. And the very people who weaponize government power against peaceful Americans, now they look the other way as real political violence unfolds. To all those on the left, the reason that you should support me in this endeavor is because there is nothing that stops Trump from just changing the examples that are laid out in the national strategy as what pertains to domestic terrorism. The national strategy isn't just an attack on one group of people. And there are things that should immediately be done to make sure that the national strategy is rescinded, but also that the Trump administration and any future administration cannot bring it back. It's an attack on our way of life and the core principles of the Republic. This document has a chilling effect, and the chilling effect is real. The consequences are dangerous, and it cuts across the political spectrum. Because if you really believe that anti-government sentiment or anti-authority sentiment is the new benchmark, anyone can be targeted. What is the impact? Well, it breeds fear. It breeds self-censorship. If I say something, is the government going to target me for saying it? Obviously, the left has no fear that President Trump is going to target them. Obviously. Because they are very outspoken against him. My concern isn't with this administration. My concern is down the road. I can't predict who's going to become president in 2028. I can't predict who's going to be president in 2032. So when we look at the national strategy, it creates a situation where people become afraid to speak out against the abuses of power of government. And if we're afraid to express our views or question those in power, well, tyranny is not far behind. I could assure you of that. And the president and Congress must reassert their authority against an out-of-control bureaucracy that has emerged as the fourth branch of government and is unconstrained by any constitutional checks because they don't care. It's amazing. Again, I have to bring it up. You have President Trump that is being handcuffed by all these district court judges. How many injunctions, nationwide injunctions, have been issued on Trump in just the first 5 months of his administration? And yet you have a bureaucracy under the Biden administration and previous administrations that routinely violated court orders, and nothing was done. There was no accountability. So what needs to happen? Well, I think the president has to immediately issue an executive order that revokes and dismantles the entire national strategy framework. And this would demonstrate President Trump's commitment to draining the swamp. More importantly, the president should issue a directive to all federal law enforcement and intelligence agencies prohibiting the use of benign political or religious beliefs as a criteria for investigations. And while the national strategy itself is an executive policy document, Congress plays a role in this as well. Remember, Congress has the power of the purse, and Congress must immediately defund any program that brings the national strategy to life. Congress has to eliminate all funding for these types of programs. They need to stop with this private-public censorship collaboration that exists. They need to stop with any type of domestic terrorism initiative that lacks clear definitions. If these bureaucratic agencies don't want to give specifics, if they don't want to be clear, then they shouldn't be funded. And federal efforts to outsource surveillance to third-party institutions and organizations needs to end immediately. They have to be abolished. If we want a government that is accountable to the people it was created to serve, Congress has to rein in the out-of-control bureaucracy. And our founding fathers warned about the dangers of an all-powerful centralized bureaucracy. You know, President Ronald Reagan, he was a brilliant man. He once said, as government expands, liberty contracts. It is long past time that public servants are reminded that they exist to serve the public, not rule over them. These actions would restore the standard that investigative activity has to be based on specific, articulable facts and evidence of criminal wrongdoing, not political disagreement, not ideological profiling. More importantly, they would prevent future efforts to revive the national strategy. And all Americans, including Democrats, should support this effort, because there is nothing to stop the Trump administration or any future administration from, as I said, changing the examples in the strategy and targeting the other side of the political aisle. We need to send a clear message to the swamp that the era of weaponizing government against law-abiding Americans is over. However, what my fear is, we're not seeing that happen. And you have Republicans back in power that may be emboldened. Well, they use this against us, so let's use it against them. That if we do this, it's going to weaken our agencies and our departments that we're now running. And that's my concern, because a lot of the people talk a good game when it comes to we need reforms when they're not in power. But once they get in power, how many reforms do you see? Listen, we've seen very little in the way of cutting back government power, right? The same people that were warning about bureaucratic overreach throughout the coronavirus, the same people that were warning bureaucratic overreach under the Biden administration, what have they really done to make sure that never happens again? You have whistleblowers. We've had them on the show. Stephen Friend, Garrett O'Boyle, both great guys coming on this show, suspended over 1,000 days. Garrett O'Boyle, 1,000 days. Think about that. Well, now what do we see? When Biden was in power, Kash Patel helped them out. Dan Bongino put him on his show. They were singing these guys' praises. But what have we seen in the last couple of weeks? Well, now we're seeing dirt being leaked about him. Not true dirt. It's not accurate information. But now they're being classified. Well, the reason we're not hiring them back, reinstating them because they're suspended. The reason we're not reinstating them is because they're troublemakers. So all of a sudden they're troublemakers. What does that tell me? It tells me that the reason you don't want them back is because they blew the whistle once already. And you're afraid if they witness other abuses, maybe at the hands of Republicans, well, maybe they're going to blow the whistle on them as well. To me, that's integrity. A bureaucrat that understands the role of public service, that whenever they see abuses of power, regardless of political party, they're going to stand up and they're going to call it out. They're going to bring attention to it. They're going to report it to Congress. But apparently Republicans don't like that because it limits their power. And that's the danger. What one party does when they're in power, a lot of times the other party will do the same thing, only they're going to expand it. They're going to take it a step further. We have to keep the pressure on. We cannot allow the political weaponization of the system. We have to call for reforms. More importantly, the reforms need to happen, and there needs to be accountability within the system. There needs to be transparency within the system. It shouldn't be hard to do what Tulsi Gabbard did. Declassify all documents immediately of any abuses of power within the last 20 years and let the American people decide for themselves. Release the information. You can still block out sources and methods, okay, but at this point, you can't hide behind classifications. Release the information to the American people. Let's dismantle the bureaucratic apparatus, and let's return our government to its rightful place as a servant of the people, not a ruler over the people. So when the left screams authoritarianism, understand, Trump is not the one that's going to be the tyrant. He's not going to be the dictator. It's going to be the bureaucratic class that does that. And that's why they need to be reined in. Now, if you found the content of this episode informative, please give the P.A.S. report a 5-star rating. Take 30 seconds. Write a good review on any podcast platform that allows it. Make sure that you share this episode with your family and friends. I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back on Wednesday with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at pasreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.